Welcome everybody to JavaFX tips and tricks, and it should actually say reloaded. I've done this presentation before, around 2 years ago. I don't know, has anybody seen that maybe 2 years ago or online? That is good because I reused some of the slides, so it's not fully reloaded. But the focus this time was a little bit on the lessons we learned from the startup in which I'm currently involved in, and I will tell a little bit more about that later. So before I start, I just want to make sure everybody is really awake. So the first couple of slides, I'd like to conduct a little Duke count and see if you're all awake and paying enough attention and not watching your cell phones. In case you don't know who Duke is, this is Duke. And this is also a subtle hint that I managed to actually win the Duke, the Java 1 Rockstar Award before, and ideally, you don't forget to vote after this presentation, and I hope you liked it. So on the web, you will find me at this location at dlsc.com. I'm working as an independent Java consultant and freelancer, and I actually should rename that to a JavaFX consultant and freelancer, because since 2013, that's all I do. So if any one of you has any questions whether JavaFX is actually getting used out there in the real world, it is being used a lot, and I could actually make a living just working on JavaFX projects and just doing front-end work. And if you want to see a few more real-world applications, then come to my second presentation on Thursday, where I actually have a catalog of over 20 real-world apps, and I present each one of them with 1 or 2 slides and videos. So that should be quite entertaining. On my website, dlsc.com, I write a blog. I've been a little bit lazy the last 12 months, I think, because I'm so heavily involved in a startup right now. But I think you will find a lot of nice technical articles and a lot of tips and tricks regarding JavaFX. The other thing I do is I'm working on commercial frameworks. I'm also licensing JavaFX frameworks, and something that I've developed almost 15 years ago already with Swing, no, more than that, 20 years ago with Swing was called FlexScanned. And in the meantime, I've replaced that with FlexScannedFX, a JavaFX version of it. And what that is that is basically an XY diagram where the x-axis displays time and the y-axis can display any kind of things, objects like resources or tasks or people. This is this is a customer project I did for an architecture office where you see the different phases of a construction site. This is the second one I did for Emirates Airlines with a split screen. A third one for the European Broadcasting Union, and a fourth one for Airbus that is being used for a satellite ground tracking system. So you can see that the component is highly customizable and very flexible thanks to the concepts that we find in JavaFX. So that's what I spend most of my time with. Because I like JavaFX so much, I created my own conference, or JavaFX own conference, that takes place in Zurich. The first one was last year, and we will have a second try at it this year. And I had to rename it to JFX Days. I just told some people about that because Oracle didn't like me to use the word JavaFX in the name of the conference. So it's JFX Days. So if you're looking for it, don't look for JavaFX Days, but JFX Days. And it will be December 2nd until the 4th, which is a fantastic time to come to Switzerland because it's all about Christmas, and you can go Christmas shopping and find great presents. So enough advertising for that. If you want to register and find out what the conference is offering, you can go to jfxdays.com, and you will also be able to find quite a long list in the meantime of JavaFX presentations. So this is a very nice resource if you want to know how people use it and what options are available to you as a JavaFX developer. At the moment, like I said, I'm working for a startup located in London. It's called Sinope, and what we are trying to do is we are trying to come up with a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, tailored to the UK energy market. So the idea is that this will be used by energy suppliers because they are opening up the market. In England, the whole energy market is going through quite a transition right now because they are in the process of replacing these old electricity meters and gas meters with modern internet-enabled meters, so-called smart meters. And all of the smart meters in England will actually be hooked up to a common network called the DCC network. So that means that now energy suppliers, people who are selling you energy and signing contracts with you, saying that they will provide electricity to you, they will be able to access your meter and get readings and find out your usage and make tailored offerings to you and customize contracts. So that's quite a lot of progress in that area. And this is the client that we have come up with so far. This is still work in progress. This is 100% JavaFX. It looks a little bit unusual because it uses a custom stage decoration, okay? So you do not see the Macintosh window title or the Windows window title. And I'm just letting you look at this a little bit. You cannot really tell that this is a JavaFX application in any way. Like in the old days when we were using Swing, you would look at a Swing application, a window, and you would just know it's Swing, right? Because, well, you saw the Java cup in the icon, right? That was one thing. And then because it was so hard to use, yes, Phil? Yeah, the repaint, the gray box effect, which disappeared in Java 6, that was such a little detail, but it was a major step, right? It made it look so much more solid. But it was also other things, like it was so hard to deal with borders. So you had nested components, and people ended up having borders and borders and borders and borders, and it just looked ugly and was really hard to style anyways. And I think if you look at this looks pretty polished, I think, and we are used to such nice UIs nowadays in the web. I think this can compete with them very, very nicely, okay? So all kinds of screens, you don't need to know all the details, what's there. I just want to show you how rich this UI is. Okay, so this Sinope customer relationship management software, we call it totally native because it's cloud native. It is DCC native. DCC is the network that they are establishing in England now to connect all the smart meters, not with each other, but with a central organization. And it is a system that is energy native, meaning this is not a CRM system that can be used by any company for any domain, any type of business, but only for the energy sector and only in UK. So it's really, really tailored to their needs, okay? It runs on Amazon AWS and deployment via Docker containers and Kubernetes. So just because it's a JavaFX application does not mean that you cannot write a cloud application, right? The front end of a cloud application doesn't have to be a web page. So how many Dukes did you see? 4? 2? 6? Who said 6? That's correct. You spotted the one in the little video? Very good. All right, so there they are. And I think especially number 4 was difficult to spot. Very good. Okay, so at least one person is paying attention. The rest continue doing what you were doing before. Okay, so let's start with a very top-level tip that is not JavaFX specific at all, but I had this a lot that people said, okay, Dirk, we saw the screenshots of your applications and they all look so good and you're doing fantastic work and all that. The design and the coolness, that's not something that I do, right? The last couple of applications I worked on, we always had a UI designer or user experience designer in the team. And we let them do the work because, and there's a fantastic quote there from me, the designer hour to developer hour ratio is 1 to n, with n being pretty big. I have no idea what number to put there, but it's huge because in the past, I was playing around with UI code and I would try this and I would try that. How does this look? How does that look? And it's just a waste of your time. And if you're like me, you're most likely not very good at drawing and designing and graphics. There are other people in the JavaFX area like Gerrit Grunwald, who also publishes a lot of really sexy UI controls, right? What people don't know, his sister is a graphics designer, okay? So he gets a lot of input from her, okay? We are coders, not designers. Okay, but if you do work with a UI designer and a UX designer, you need some way of interacting with them and exchanging the results of their work and giving feedback and all of that. And there are plenty of tools that you can find on the web, because this is, and that's what is nice about web pages or HTML. These guys have the same requirements, so there are plenty of tools in this area, okay? Very often you don't find a lot of JavaFX tools, but for stuff like this, you find tons of tools on the web. So the tool we use is called Zeppelin, and there's a desktop client for it, and you can also access it via the web. And you can see we created all our screens in this tool. I hope you recognize them again from the video earlier. And this tool is just, it's really fantastic, okay? You can also manage all the colors and the global style sheets in there, so that in the end you have this nice list of colors, for example, and because the JavaFX CSS is so compatible to the web CSS, you can almost just copy all of that and put it into your code base, right? And this is what that looks like in our Sinope CRM project in IntelliJ IDEA. These are exactly the same colors that you just saw in Zeppelin. Okay, and when you do this and when you invest in a UI designer and a user experience designer, then you can come up with good-looking software like this one. This was a project I did, I think, around 2 years ago. It's for a company that specialized on software for coaches. And this tool is called the Presentation Builder, which would allow the user to select from a list of video clips and put them together to a training or coaching video for their players. So they can analyze a match and annotate the video with arrows and circles, and then they can present it to their players and tell them, well, next time you have to do this or do that, right? And when you have a good-looking application like this one, then you can also use it directly as a marketing tool, okay, for your marketing purposes. So they came up with this nice little video that they put on the web. Okay, so there's an additional benefit. If your application looks this nice, you can use it for marketing directly. It's almost like an Apple product. Okay, so that was my first advice. Hire a UI person, hire a UX designer. Now, the next one is you should definitely know the JavaFX ecosystem. You need to know which tools are out there, and there are plenty out there in the meantime. And these, for example, are just the ones that I released, okay? This is how they are being presented on BinTray. So there's one of the bigger projects of mine called CalendarFX for creating a really full-blown rich calendar application. FormsFX for dealing with forms, form layout. WorkbenchFX, that gives you like a basic structure for rapidly creating your own application. And there's PreferencesFX for coming up with dialogues that allow you to set preferences. There are 3 new ones that I basically announced for the first time today. I don't know if anyone follows me on Twitter, but I already mentioned that they will be announced at this conference. They're called GemsFX, PickFX, and UnitFX. So let's start with UnitFX. This project contains a collection of controls that can be used in combination with a unit of measures. If you want a text field that allows you to enter values for a specific unit, for speed, for temperature, things like that, then you need this. And this project was sponsored by a company in Finland called Navi Electro. And they paid me some serious money to implement these controls. But they also said they're totally OK with me releasing this as open source software. And I think that is really nice of them. So UnitFX targets the JSR 363. And I think just to 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's a new specification that was finalized for units of measurement, which builds on top of JSR 363. So the framework gives you text fields for units of measure, for example, speed, length, weight, angle, mass, temperature. The controls support the concept of a base unit. So you can create a text field and you can say the base unit, for example, is meter. And then if the user chooses to change to kilometer, then the text field will automatically mark the field for you so that you're aware that you are not working with meters anymore. The fields give you input validation. They give you automatic conversion if you switch the unit. It allows you to specify a minimum and maximum range, and you can configure the control to say whether you also want to support negative values. And I have a little video that shows you how this works. So up there in the length field, I'm entering 10,000 meters, switching to kilometers. Now it's marked in orange, telling us the user changed it. Now it's feet. Then you get that really weird number that doesn't make any sense at all. All right? So stuff like that. It's just super convenient if you don't have to implement this yourself anymore. All right? So UnitFX is a highly specialized library just for dealing with entering units or values for units of measure. You can find it on GitHub, and it's available today, and the first version has already been pushed to Maven Central. The next control is called PickFX. I'm not even sure that Picker is the right name for this kind of control. Maybe, Phil, you find of a better name for these controls. You will see in a minute. These controls were also sponsored by Navi Electro. And they are touch controls, and they were inspired, in quotes, so basically copied from the iOS design, at least the older iOS designs. And the library contains a couple of Picker implementations for selecting items, values, dates, date and time, and so on. So that's what they look like. Okay, so they stutter a little bit, but that is because I was using a mouse wheel, which fires very discrete values. So the animation is not very nice. But in between, you will sometimes see much smoother scrolling. That's when I use a touchpad, the Magic Pad from Apple. Yeah, like there. So it's much smoother. And another option, of course, is to use the mouse cursor and just perform a drag. Okay, and the item picker, for example, can be accepts a cell factory, so you can display any kind of objects in there, not just A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, but you could also have icons and images in there. All right, you also find PickFX on GitHub at this location. That was number 2. And then number 3, I call GemsFX. This is really still work in progress. It really, at the moment, only contains one control and one tool. But I thought they were so useful that I should push this already now, because I think you might be able to use them for your applications. It's also on GitHub at this location, GemsFX. And the one control that's in there is just a simple, well, it's not a simple, it's a draw control, but it's a more sophisticated one than you find in most cases. Okay, so it's nicely animated. When the draw slides in, it automatically creates a glass pane so that you cannot click on the background. If you do click on the background, it will close. It gives you that nice drag handle. It listens to escape keys so that you can close it via the keyboard. If you drag the mouse out of the window at the bottom, it will completely close the drawer, boom, like this. But it will not save the location, because that's what it's also doing. It's storing the last height of the drawer via the Java util preferences API, so that next time you start up the drawer, it will open at the same size. Yeah. Okay, like this is something I said earlier. Even desktop applications connect to the cloud, and then you always have this issue that you do not want to block the UI. So data loading needs to run on a separate thread. And UI updates have to run on the JavaFX application thread. So that's nothing new. And errors also have to be handled and shown to the user. So if you want to implement a REST service like with pure Java API, then it would look something like this, right? You would need to write a lot of code. And in this case, the endpoint is a user management endpoint trying to load the user with the ID 10. Okay, so it creates a URL connection. It checks for response codes. Is it a 200 or not? It reads the object and then uses JAXB to create an object out of the returned string, right? So that's really bare bone REST endpoint invocation. To make sure that it does not block the UI, you have to run this whole thing in a separate thread. So you have to add the thread creation to it. But then if it runs in a thread and you want to update the UI, you have to call platform run later, okay? So you really have to make sure you call all of these things on the right thread. So that's a lot of code. Luckily, for REST calls, there's this project called Retrofit. How many people know this project? One? Just one? Two? Okay. So this is a very nice and lightweight framework so that you can implement your REST endpoint calls just like regular Java API calls. And what you need to do is you have to create an interface for your REST endpoint. So you say public interface user management service. You create a method that, like in this case, get user, where you pass the user ID and you annotate the variable with the path ID. And in the get annotation, you basically add the path to your endpoint, okay? So that's all you need to do to model this. And then you need to create a retrofit instance that knows what the base URL is. And once you have this, then you can actually create an instance of the user management service like this. You say retrofit create user management service. So now that you have this, the code becomes much more compact. This is still running in a separate thread. But you still need to do all of these calls, and you have to make sure you use platform run later. Okay? So this is already progress, but it gets better. If you don't want to use an explicit thread creation, you can use the enqueue method on the REST endpoint, on the get user, and you have to pass in a callback with two methods. One is called onResponse and the other one onFailure. So now you got rid of the thread, but you still have these platform run later in there in 3 different places. And in an older project of mine, I used this pattern, and there were many, many places where I forgot to call this. And the big problem is that, for example, the onFailure method, very often you never see it getting invoked because your application works most of the time. But then all of a sudden, the user, the customer is trying out your application, and this gets called, and you didn't add the platform run later, and you get an exception from JavaFX saying that you called this on the wrong thread. Okay, so you never have a guarantee that all your code is actually running on the correct code. So problems with this approach: a lot of boilerplate code. You might forget to use the UI thread and the readability of the code. Okay, we can get better at this. So in GemsFX, you will find a class that is called ServiceInvocation. And you just call ServiceInvocation create. You pass in the title or some text that you can then reuse, for example, in the status bar of your application, in this case, loading user. And you pass in a Lambda expression that invokes the interface method, the get user, and execute. And then you can use a Fluent API to define what should happen if the method returns successfully, or what happens if there has been an exception. Then there are more methods that allow you to also set handlers for specific HTTP status codes. Okay, so this is, I think, at least that's my opinion, much more readable than what we had before. Then usually what you have is you have a central point that you use to execute your asynchronous backend calls. In our case, with the Sinope CRM system, it is called a shell. And it has a method called execute. And I just pass in the ServiceInvocation instance. And the shell will execute the ServiceInvocation for me, which means that now I do not have to deal with the onException or onError or onHTTP status code methods, because the shell, once it receives the service invocation, will set these handlers on all invocations that we pass to them, because then the shell knows, okay, something went wrong. I have to show a dialog that tells the user we received an error message. So this is how we started, a lot of code. And this is where we are now. And this is, I think, much more readable, much more compact. This is just one more example that shows you a real-world application, how we use it in the Sinope CRM system. This is the part that we use to log into the backend. So here you can also see an on status code, HTTP status code unauthorized, so the password maybe was not correct, and then we do a couple of things, okay? But it's because of its Fluent API, I think it's all very readable and just nice to look at. Right? And you find the service invocation also as part of GemsFX. Okay, another huge time saver that we discovered for us was a project that is called, and I just learned that yesterday at a party when I was talking to the author of this framework. It's called EconLi. So it is used for dealing with icons. And he chose to use the German spelling for it with a K. And he added the Swiss suffix li. So the combination is now EconLi. But you probably, if you've used this before, you probably called it EconLi, and you thought it means icon library or something like that. So this is a nice lightweight solution for adding icons, because the problem we saw was that we ended up with way too many PNG files if we wanted to use icon files. And because we were working with a graphic designer who thought that he should send us all these graphical artifacts as PNG files, we sort of inherited this. We took them, we said, oh yeah, okay, we didn't think too much about it, and we started using PNG files. So we were put on the wrong path for a while. But then the pain got bigger and bigger, and we never really found the time to turn around. So in the end, we had hundreds of files. And the problem is that if you need an icon, for example, for a user, then you have a user PNG file. But you also need different versions for the different states, right? You need user hover, user pressed, user selected, because you cannot use CSS for this. And it gets even worse if you want to support high-res displays. Then you have like a second version for each icon. And that's another thing that many people also don't know. If you use the same file name again, but you just add the at 2 times, then JavaFX will automatically pick up the high-res version if you're running, for example, on a Retina display. Okay, so all of a sudden now, instead of 1 icon, we have 8. Okay, so we didn't want that. And the solution for this is the same as also for web pages. You create your own custom font so that you end up with a single file containing all of your icons. Okay, that makes it much more, a whole lot easier to handle. And if you use a font, that also means that these icons automatically become stylable. You can use CSS and define the different appearance of your icons in the CSS file. Okay. Examples for icon fonts are, of course, Font Awesome, Material Design, Icon Set, Weather Icons, and so on. So what you can do is you can use any of these online tools, and again, there are plenty of those tools, for creating your own custom icon font. And you can, very often, you can just select some of the icons that they already offer, or you can upload a set of PNG files and create your own font that way. So let's take a closer look at fontello.com. Here you select a couple of icons. Then you can customize the name for each one of the icons. And you can assign a Unicode to them. Okay, so once you have done this, you can download the font. And you get a zip file. And inside the zip file, you will find a file called demo.html. And when you click on that, you will see this. Okay, so your font was created successfully. And if you click on Show Codes, you will also see the Unicodes. So now you have your custom font with your custom icons, with your custom Unicodes. Now we need to turn this, okay, well, one more thing. You also, of course, have the file for the font, Fontello TrueType font. You can double click on it, and if you're working with a Mac, you will see it in the application called Fontbook, I think. And now you see all the icons that we use for our CRM system. Okay, but now we need some Java code or JavaFX code so that we can use this icon font inside our application. And this is when you need to start looking at EconLi. This is the website for it. It has a very good documentation, and it already supports, I think, 30 or 31 font sets out of the box. Okay, and you don't, if you start using it and you add a dependency to your project, that does not mean that all of those fonts end up in your application. Each one has its own artifact. All right. So also on the website, you will find cheat sheets for each one of the fonts. All right. Okay, now if you want to add it to your code base, what you need to do is you have to implement the icon interface. So in our system, we have an enum called CRM icon, and you list all the icons as an enum value, and you pass in the name of the icon and the Unicode. That's one class that you need to implement. And the second one is called an icon handler. There's a default or an abstract icon handler that you can reuse. And it's not much. You just basically, you have to point to the TrueType font file. You have to give it a name. In this case, it's called Sinope line icons. And all of the icons usually start with a common prefix within a font set. In our case, CRM icon. Okay, once you have done, so you have to do this. Then you have to register your font set via the service lookup mechanism. So you have to place this file called icon handler in the meta-inf services directory. So that EconLi will find it. And of course, you have to add the TrueType font also to your resources folder. Okay. Now that you've done this work, you can reference the icons within fxml like this. You just create an instance of font icon, and you pass in the name of the icon. So that's one way of doing it. In this case, the icon is placed inside a label, and the style class of the label is my button. And then you can style it like this: my button, EconLi font icon, and you can set the color and the size of the icon. All right? And then you're back in the JavaFX world, right? No special treatment. You're familiar with these stylable properties. Everything is good. Okay, and if you want to do it in code, you can do it like this: font icon equals new font icon. You pass in the enum, and you set a size and a color, and then you set it as a graphic on a label. All right? So it's very simple to use. All right. Any questions so far regarding this icon library? Has anybody used this before or used any other out-of-the-box, like Font Awesome? Nothing? All right.
The web service you're using, is that actually, you supply PNGs?
Sorry,
the web service you were using, it's unclear how that was.
the web service I was using, yes?
Yeah.
What?
Were you uploading PNGs?
Not PNGs, no, SVG files. SVG, yeah. So we went back to our designer and told him we need, forget PNG, send us SVG, and then we uploaded SVGs. Yeah. All right, so the next tip, ScenicView. Does everybody know ScenicView for JavaFX? Yeah, okay. But you find it at this location, okay? I think most people are familiar with it. You cannot really do JavaFX development without ScenicView. It's too essential. ScenicView allows you to connect to running JavaFX application and inspect the scene graph like this. The tree on the left can get really, really huge, but eventually you will find the node that you're interested in, and then you click on it and you can see all the properties that are currently set on that node, okay? But what most people, the way most people use it is they launch ScenicView from the command line. So they just say Java, jar, ScenicView, jar, and then it starts a separate process, and you connect to your JavaFX application. What many people do not know, there's also an API for it. So you can add the ScenicView lib to your application, and then you can call ScenicView show, and you pass in the scene, or you pass in any node that implements a parent. Okay, and this is super useful because now you can edit, for example, the way we did it to the user menu. So if our application is running in a dev environment, we always have ScenicView available to us right there. So we have a separate menu item, and then I can launch ScenicView in process, which makes it launch really, really fast. And in addition, a couple of things work better than if you attach it externally. And also these two tabs, the 3DOM and the CSSFX tab, they really only work if you run this within your application. So CSSFX is a tool that constantly reloads your CSS files. It doesn't work for all CSS files. It doesn't always find them. But in most cases, it works pretty well. And 3DOM gives you a 3D visualization of your application, which sometimes it's nice to give you an idea regarding the complexity of your application. Okay, sometimes I looked at my app and I thought, whoa, there are way more nodes than I thought I would use in this place. So that's what this tool is really useful for. Okay. Create standalone samples. So I like to think of them as unit tests for your UI because you want to minimize round trip times. In our application, in the video you saw earlier, there were a couple of dialogues that were really, really nested deep inside. So you had to get to them, you probably need around 10 clicks, okay? And if you're working in that area of your application and you always have to relaunch the app and do 10 clicks before you actually get to the point that you want to check whether everything's working, then you're just wasting a lot of time. So what you should always do is create standalone samples for your applications. And there's this fantastic tool called FX Sampler. It offers these screens. You create samples. They will all be listed in this tree view on the left-hand side, and then you can launch each sample separately. It gets shown in the middle. And on the right-hand side, you get a control panel that lets you play around with a couple of the settings of that control that you're currently testing. So that's one view. The other view is this one. It can show you the source code of that sample. The third view shows you the CSS that is being used for that sample. And the fourth one shows you the documentation. So it's all in one place, and it's really useful. And this is a sub-project of the ControlsFX project. In our application, our CRM system, we currently have 105 samples. Okay, because I really try to make it a habit if I worked on a custom control that I have a sample for it and I play around with it there until it's as perfect as possible, and then I integrate it into the application and do the rest there. So this is one of the samples for our CRM system, a little chart that we did. You know, on a chart like this one, in the end, you spend at least 1 or 2 days until this is looking like this, right? And if you do this in your application and you always click and click just to get to the point so that you have access to this chart, then it can easily become 3 or 4 days, okay? It's just a waste of your time. So create standalone samples for your custom controls. This is another one that this control with that vertical line that represents time, that has a lot of detail to it and a lot of CSS styling. It was a lot of work, but it got easier because I had this sample. Okay, if you want to create, or if you want to use FX Sampler, you just add this dependency to your project, or ControlsFX. Like I said, it's a sub-project. FX Sampler, the version is 109. I think this project needs some love from its project owner very soon, because, for example, I think it doesn't even work with, at least not 100% correctly, with JavaFX 11 and higher, which is a problem. So our application also is still on JavaFX 8. Okay? unfortunately. But we will move to 13 very soon. All right. So then the next thing you have to do is you create like the enclosing project for your samples. And in this case, it's called CRM Sampler Project, implements FX Sampler Project. And you have to give it a name. What is nice is this framework also uses service lookup. So if you have a lot of different libraries from different people, they can all add their demos to the same sampler. They will all show up in the same window. All right. What? 5 minutes? All right. All right. Time flies when you're having fun. So this is the enclosing project. You give it a name, and then you also tell it where it will find the samples. So you the base package. If you want to, you can also customize it with a welcome page. Then next thing you do, again, because it's using service lookup, you create this file called FX Sampler Project, and in there you just list the class name of your project, in this case, CRM Sampler Project. Now, each sample can have all of this information in it, the name of the sample, short description, the name of the project version, and so on and so on. So I would highly recommend you create an abstract base class for your samples, and you override most of these methods because they will always be the same, right? They will always have they all belong to the same project, they will have the same project version, so you should do that. And if you do that, then most of your samples will roughly have this size, okay? Hello checkmark view, so it's a sample for this thingy here, the check mark, extends the abstract class called CRM sample. You override create control, you create this checkmark view, you return it, and in get control panel, you return the right-hand side of your sample that allows you to configure the control. And in this case, the user can set it to success or failure or pending, and the checkmark view will then turn yellow and so on. Okay, 5 minutes. Yeah, I think I can still do clipping. So if you want to have a pixel-perfect UI, you have to understand how clipping works, okay? Because once you stop using standard layout panes, you have to deal with it yourself, okay? Nodes are not automatically clipped to the region that they belong to, and a scaled node might actually leave the area of the parent region. So let's just take a look at this. You have a region, my region, there's a child node in it, and you scale it, and it might actually leave the area of the parent region. Okay, so I have a good example here. I was once converting a world map view control from Gerrit Grunwald to the Controls FX project, and I added it, and all of a sudden the map would actually reach out of the box. And in the end, I think this actually looks pretty cool. And I think this is also something you couldn't really do with Swing back in the days, right? You were always, well, at least it would take more work. But here, this just happened by accident, and it actually looked good. All right, there it is, not good. So how do you do clipping? You just create a node, in this case a rectangle. You bind the clip to the width of the region and the height of the region, and then you set the clip like this. So that's a very simple clip, right? Just a rectangle, and most people are familiar with that concept. But in JavaFX, what you can also do is you can use any shape to do clipping. So you could also use a circle to do clipping. And one of the most obvious use cases is like an avatar picture like this one that nowadays very often are round, right? So in this case, the clip is a circle shape. I really started looking into clipping because I wanted to implement something that looked very similar to the Popover control that the iCal application of Apple is using, okay? And there you had these rounded corners here and here. And I needed to make sure that the content shown inside the Popover would not overlap the corners and make it a rectangle again. Okay, so this was my version of this Popover control. I contributed this to Controls FX. Maybe some of you have used it already. Okay, and I just really wanted to make sure we have nice corners. Okay, but the problem very often is that if you put something big inside the popover, then the content would overlap the round corner, like here, and all of a sudden it's not round anymore. Right? So my block is called Pixel Perfect. Stuff like this really, really annoys me, okay? So I wanted this to be perfect. So how could I do this? And the solution was to come up with a clip that uses a path object, okay? So if you set a path like this on a content that's rectangle like that, then the result is what you see on the right-hand side. But the problem was that the clip would cut out everything in the center of this rectangle also. So the result was just this outline until I understood that I actually had to fill the path with the color, and then the clipping would work as desired, okay? So I did this, and then all of a sudden, this also worked very nicely. Okay, and this was then the final result in our application. Okay, all around. All right, so I think we are out of time. Yep, he's holding up a sign, time's up. If you have any questions, come and see me. I don't think we can do it here anymore. Thank you.